She left home on a Saturday morning to go fishing. She never came back. Her truck was still at the river. Keys still inside. Water bottle still on the ground. Everything exactly where she left it. Everything except her. And for 28 years, the man who did it drove to work every single morning. Ate dinner with his family every night. Collected a federal paycheck. Shook hands with neighbors. And slept just fine. Until the night 2 investigators knocked on his door, and what happened next will make your skin crawl. There is a detail in this case that I haven't told you yet. A detail so disturbing that when the investigators finally revealed it publicly, the room went completely silent. We'll get to it. But first, stay with me. This is the story of 15-year-old Danielle Houchins, known to everyone who loved her as Danny, from Belgrade, Montana. A girl who drove to her favorite fishing spot on the Gallatin River on the morning of September 21, 1996. A girl who never drove home. This is the story of 4 hares. Of a family that refused to stop screaming into the silence. Of a killer hiding in plain sight for nearly 3 decades. And of the single phone call, less than 12 hours after detectives sat across from him, that confirmed everything. Before we go any further, hit that subscribe button right now and tap the bell so you never miss a story like this. Drop a comment below and tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We read every single one. And join our community, the link is waiting for you in the description box below. In this video, we are going to walk through every layer of this case, the crime itself, and what the autopsy revealed that authorities initially tried to downplay, the 28-year cold case investigation and every dead end, the revolutionary DNA technology that broke it wide open, the interview that lasted less than 2 hours and destroyed a man, and the final phone call that answered everything and nothing all at once. Watch until the very end. Because the last piece of this story is the one that will stay with you. Belgrade, Montana. 1996, picture it exactly as it was. A small western town where the Gallatin River cuts through wide open pastureland under enormous skies. A place where people left their cars unlocked as a matter of habit, not carelessness. Where everybody knew their neighbor's name, their neighbor's truck, their neighbor's dog. This was the kind of place where a 15-year-old girl could drive alone to a fishing spot on a Saturday morning and nobody would think twice about it. Because nothing bad happened in Belgrade. Because it was Montana. Because it was 1996. And that sense of safety, the deep, unexamined certainty that nothing could go wrong, is exactly what made that Saturday morning so catastrophically wrong. Danielle Houchins was born in 1981. She grew up in Belgrade with her mother Cheryl and her younger sister Stephanie. Neighbors remembered the bond between Cheryl and Danny as unbreakable. Danny was the light of that household, the older sister, the one Stephanie looked up to. And Stephanie, smaller and quieter than Danny, would spend the next 28 years becoming the loudest voice in the room on her sister's behalf. On the morning of September 21, 1996, Danny left home to go fishing at the Cameron Bridge fishing access on the Gallatin River. She had been there many times before. It was a familiar spot, a comfortable trip. She was wearing blue jeans and a gray sweatshirt. She had a knee brace on her left knee from a dancing injury weeks earlier. She took her water bottle. She drove away from the house. That was the last time anyone who loved her saw Danny Houchins alive. When afternoon came and Danny hadn't returned, Cheryl started calling. Friends. Classmates. Anyone who might know where her daughter was. No one knew. Cheryl got in her car and drove to the river. She found Danny's pickup truck parked by the riverbank. Unlocked. Keys on the ground nearby. Water bottle beside them. No sign of a struggle. No broken glass. No skid marks. No indication that anything violent had happened right there at the truck. Just Danny's things, exactly where she had left them. And no Danny. Cheryl called the police. The Gallatin County Sheriff's Office and search and rescue units arrived and spread out along the riverbank, through the brush, along the water's edge, calling her name as the light faded from the Montana sky. Family friends joined the search, moving in different directions, hoping to hear something, find something, see something. When it became fully dark, too dark to search safely, the decision was made to stop until morning. But before that stop order was carried out, a group of family friends found Danny. She was face down in the shallow marshy water of the Gallatin River, hidden under a willow tree on the riverbank, not far from where her truck was parked. The position of her body, the way she had been placed, it told investigators immediately that she had not simply fallen in. She had been dragged there. Hidden there. And this is where things take a dark turn. The autopsy revealed the full horror of what had happened on that riverbank. Danni Houchins had been sexually assaulted. And this is the part that investigators and family members have struggled to put into words without breaking, someone had held her head down. Held it down into the mud of the shallow water. And kept it there. Not a drowning. Not an accident. Not a slip into the river. A deliberate act. Sustained. Until she stopped moving. The detail that would eventually silence a room full of journalists in 2024 came from the autopsy report. The medical examiner noted not water in Danny's lungs, but a stomach full of mud. As one former investigator would later say, almost in disbelief, who swallows mud? That doesn't happen in a drowning. What did we find in Danielle? A stomach full of mud. Years later, Danny's sister Stephanie would describe what was done to her sister in words that leave no room for ambiguity. He violently raped my sister, then pushed her head down into the swamp until she suffocated from the mud. From Danny's body, investigators collected DNA from the sexual assault. Direct biological evidence. The key that would unlock the entire case, but not for another 28 years. And on her body, they found something else. 4 hairs. 4 hairs that did not belong to Danny. 4 hairs from the man who had stood over her on that riverbank and left them there without knowing it. Those 4 hairs were bagged, labeled, and placed into evidence storage alongside everything else collected that night. No one knew then that those 4 hairs would wait 28 years to tell their story. The investigation began the same night Danny's body was found. Gallatin County Sheriff's investigators started interviewing everyone who had been at or near Cameron Bridge fishing access on September 21. Anyone who had seen Danny's truck. Anyone who had seen a stranger in the area. Anyone who had been on that section of the Gallatin River that morning. The DNA from the biological evidence and the 4 hairs were sent to a forensic lab. The results were compared against CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system, the National Criminal Database. And the results came back. No match. Because the man who killed Danni Houchins had never been arrested. Had never left a single trace in any law enforcement system. Had never given anyone any reason to take his DNA. He simply wasn't in the database. And in 1996, that was the end of the road. But that's not even the worst part. In those early months, not everyone in the sheriff's department treated this as what it clearly was, a homicide. Some, looking at a girl found face down in shallow water, defaulted to the easier explanation. An accident. A drowning. Former Sheriff's Detective Cindy Botek, who began her career just days before Danny was found dead, later said it plainly, investigating the death as a homicide never appeared to be a priority for department leadership. A stomach full of mud. A body that had been dragged and hidden under a tree. Evidence of sexual assault. And the instinct of leadership was, maybe it was an accident. The family knew better from day one. Investigators interviewed potential suspects over the following months and years, people in the area that day, people with related criminal histories, people named by witnesses. Each one was added to the list. Each one was followed up on. DNA samples were taken where there were grounds to do so. Every single result came back negative. No match. No match. No match. Because the man they were looking for was not in any of those files. He had no criminal record. No traffic violations. He had never done anything in his entire life to make anyone look at him twice. He was invisible to the system because the system had never had any reason to see him. Years passed. The list of suspects grew longer. Each name was ruled out. The trail went cold. And somewhere in Montana, less than 200 miles from the Houchins family, the man who killed Danny was living his life. Stephanie Houchins grew up without her older sister. Grew up with the question as a permanent presence in her life, not a mystery that time softened, but one that sharpened every year the answer didn't come. She contacted police. She followed every new development in DNA technology. She asked and asked and asked again. And for many consecutive years, the answer was always the same, nothing new. She later said, 28 years is too long. I had to fight so much. She promised herself and she promised Danny that she would keep going. And Cheryl Houchins, Danny's mother. The woman who drove to the river that afternoon looking for her daughter and found an unlocked truck with keys on the ground. The woman who stood by the Gallatin River as darkness fell and waited while searchers moved through the brush. She lived every one of those 28 years knowing that somewhere in the same state of Montana, the man who killed her daughter was going to work in the morning. She just didn't know his name. If this story is hitting you hard, you're not alone. Like this video and subscribe so you never miss stories like Danny's. And join our community through the link in the description where we go deeper on cases that deserve to be remembered. In September 1996, the same month Danny Houchins was killed, Paul Hutchinson had just arrived in Bozeman, Montana as a new graduate student at Montana State University. He was studying fisheries and wildlife biology. He was researching rivers, aquatic ecosystems, life in moving water. Let that sink in for a moment. A man studying rivers drowned a 15-year-old girl in one of those very rivers. A man studying life in that water took a life in that water. He was new to the area, with no long-term connections, no established presence, a stranger who had been in Bozeman for only weeks when he drove out to the Gallatin River on the morning of September 21, 1996. After graduating, Hutchinson went to work for the United States Bureau of Land Management. He settled in Dillon, Montana. He married a woman named Chrissy. They had 2 children, a daughter who was around 20 years old by 2024, and a younger son. He worked for the Bureau of Land Management for 22 years. No criminal record. No traffic violations. Nothing, not a single flag in 2 decades of federal employment records. Colleagues knew him. Neighbors recognized him. His wife and children had no idea. No idea that the man at their dinner table every night had held a 15-year-old girl's head down in a Montana river until she stopped breathing. Investigators later described it as a crime of opportunity. A newcomer to the area, driving out to the same river he was studying, encountering a lone teenage girl on the riverbank. A decision made in a moment. A decision that destroyed 2 families. There is no indication that Danny and Hutchinson had ever crossed paths before. They were strangers. And because they were strangers, there was no thread for investigators to pull. No relationship to investigate. No history to unravel. He walked into her life for a few minutes on a September morning and then disappeared back into his own, and no one connected those 2 things for 28 years. In 2018, something happened that changed cold case investigation forever. Joseph James DeAngelo, the Golden State Killer, was arrested after investigators used a revolutionary new tool, forensic genetic genealogy. Instead of searching criminal databases, they searched commercial genealogy databases where millions of ordinary people had voluntarily submitted their DNA to learn about their ancestry or find distant relatives. The technology built a family tree from anonymous DNA. It didn't require the perpetrator to be in any criminal database. It only required that some relative, even a 3rd or 4th cousin, had uploaded their DNA to one of those commercial services. And from that distant match, investigators could build a tree, narrow it down, and identify a specific person of the right age in the right place at the right time. And it worked. Sheriff Dan Springer of Gallatin County had followed all of this closely. Because he had 4 hairs. 4 hairs sitting in evidence storage since 1996, properly preserved, still waiting. In 2019, the case was officially reopened. The evidence was sent first to an advanced forensic lab in California. The DNA was reprocessed with the best technology available in 2019 and compared once more against CODIS. No match. Again. Disappointing. But not the end. Investigators Tom Elfmont, a former LAPD captain brought in because he lived near Bozeman and knew the Montana terrain, and Kurt Depweg of the Newport Beach Police Department, a specialist in solving homicides using DNA technology, made the next decision. The decision that would break the case open. They obtained a court order to access expanded DNA databases beyond CODIS. Commercial databases. The kind where ordinary people upload their DNA to find out where their great-grandparents came from. It was a complex step. A legally demanding step. One that many agencies had hesitated to pursue. Elfmont and Depweg pursued it. The evidence was sent to Parabon NanoLabs, the same company that had helped identify the Golden State Killer. Forensic genealogists built a full genetic profile from the 28-year-old material in those 4 hairs. Then they searched. Found partial matches, distant relatives who had no idea their DNA was being used to build a family tree around a 1996 murder in Montana. Branch by branch. Generation by generation. Narrowing toward a single person of the right age, in the right geographic area, in September 1996. What happened next shocked everyone. About 2 months after Parabon NanoLabs began their work, a name emerged from the family tree. 28 years. 3 decades of dead ends. And an algorithm combined with meticulous human genealogy work found what traditional investigation never could. Paul Nathaniel Hutchinson. 55 years old. Dillon, Montana. Bureau of Land Management. 22 years of federal service. No criminal record. Investigators confirmed Hutchinson had been enrolled at Montana State University in September 1996. He had been in the Bozeman area. He had been near the Gallatin River. Everything matched. Everything. Stay right here, we are about to get to the part of this story that no one saw coming. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now and join our community through the link in the description below. July 23, 2024. Tom Elfmont and Kurt Depweg drove to Dillon, Montana. They arrived at a house on an ordinary street, a house that looked exactly like every other house on that block. The home where Paul Hutchinson lived with his wife and 2 children. They knocked on the door. Paul Hutchinson, 55 years old, sat down across from the 2 investigators in his own home. He had no idea they had his DNA. No idea that 2 months of work by Parabon NanoLabs had led, branch by branch through a family tree, to his front door. No idea that what they were about to discuss was a Saturday morning 28 years ago on the banks of the Gallatin River. For nearly 2 hours, the investigators talked to Paul Hutchinson. And what they saw during those 2 hours was not the reaction of a man with nothing to hide. Paul Hutchinson sweated heavily. Continuously. He scratched his face over and over. He chewed on his own hand. These behaviors were so marked, so sustained, so far beyond ordinary nervousness that the investigators documented them precisely in their official report. Because they were significant. Because a person being questioned for the first time about a case they had nothing to do with does not behave like that. A person with nothing to fear does not sweat through 2 hours of questioning in their own home. Does not chew on their hand. Does not leave the interview in the state the investigators described observing when the conversation ended. What happened inside Paul Hutchinson's mind that night, in the hours between the end of that interview and early the next morning, no one knows. And no one ever will. But here is what we do know. Early in the morning of July 24, 2024, less than 12 hours after Tom Elfmont and Kurt Depweg had sat across from Paul Hutchinson in his living room, Hutchinson called the Beaverhead County Sheriff's Office. He said he needed help. Then he hung up. Before saying where he was. Before saying what kind of help. Before saying anything more. Dispatch sent responders. They searched the area. They found Paul Hutchinson on the side of a road, dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He had called for help. And then made sure no help could reach him in time. After Hutchinson's death, investigators took a DNA sample following proper procedure. The result was exactly what Sheriff Springer and every member of the investigative team had been working toward for years. Paul Hutchinson's DNA was a 100% match with the DNA in the 4 hairs collected from Danni Houchins' body on the evening of September 21, 1996. 100%. In August 2024, Sheriff Dan Springer stood before reporters alongside Stephanie Houchins, now Stephanie Mollett, to announce what 28 years of fighting had finally produced. Springer said, "This appeared to be a crime of opportunity where an evil man took the life of an innocent and lovely 15-year-old girl. We never gave up on finding the truth for Danni and her family. We used every means necessary to bring closure to this heartbreaking chapter." And then Stephanie spoke. The woman who had grown up without her sister. Who had carried Danni's name into every meeting, every phone call, every year of silence when the answer wouldn't come. She said, "Although this man will not face a jury, I have no doubt that he is the one who violently raped my sister, then pushed her head down into the swamp until she suffocated from the mud. When the time came to face and take responsibility for his violence, he instead chose to end his own life. He knew his guilt. And he could not face my family, or his own family, and the pain he had caused." And then she turned to Montana, to the entire community that had lived with this case in its background for 28 years, and she said the words she had been preparing for a very long time: "Montanans, Danielle's story should make you angry. It should make you think about your mothers, your sisters, your wives, and your daughters. It should make you think about everything you would do to protect and honor the women you love. 28 years is too long. I had to fight so much. The institutions failed my sister, failed my family, and failed this community." She had her answer. She knew the name. She knew what those 4 hairs had revealed. But there was no trial. No moment in a courtroom. No sentence read by a judge. No moment when Stephanie and Cheryl Houchins could sit and look into the face of the man who took Danni and watch justice close around him. He had taken that from them too. And across town, in a house in Dillon where Paul Hutchinson had lived and raised his family, his wife Chrissy released a statement. A statement that is one of the most painful documents to come out of this case. "We are completely devastated by this news, and our hearts go out to the Houchins family. It is good to know that they will finally be able to find the closure they deserve. In 24 years of marriage, there was never any indication that something like this could be hidden. Paul was a wonderful husband and father. This latest news makes our grief much more complicated. 2 families destroyed by one morning in 1996. The Houchins family, who lost Danni and then spent 28 years without an answer. And the Hutchinson family, who lost everything in a different way the morning those investigators knocked on the door. People who knew nothing. People who will spend the rest of their lives asking questions about the man they thought they knew. This case is a lesson in so many things at once. It is a lesson in the importance of preserving evidence. Those 4 hairs sat in proper evidence storage for 28 years, through leadership changes, through updates to storage procedures, through all the years when no one knew if they would ever be useful. If those hairs had been discarded. If the file had been officially closed and the evidence cleared out. If even one decision along the way had gone the other direction, Paul Hutchinson would have lived the rest of his life in Dillon, Montana, collecting his federal pension, watching his children grow up, and no one would ever have known. The 4 hairs were the difference between justice and nothing. It is a lesson in what forensic genetic genealogy means for cold cases. This technology does not require the perpetrator to be in any criminal database. It only requires that somewhere in the world, a distant relative submitted DNA out of curiosity about their ancestry. And that network grows wider every year as more people upload to commercial services. Cases that were sealed shut in 1990 or 1985 or 1975 are being cracked open right now across this country. But it is also a lesson in the limits of that technology. Forensic genetic genealogy can find the person. It cannot control whether that person is still alive. It cannot guarantee that the answer arrives in time for a trial, a conviction, a sentence. It can name the killer. It cannot always make him face what he did. And there is one more question that sits at the edge of this case and has not been answered. Did Paul Hutchinson have other victims? Sheriff Springer confirmed that the investigation into Hutchinson's life continues even after the Houchins case has been resolved. Because a man who did what Hutchinson did, once, to a stranger, on a riverbank, may not have stopped at once. And those answers, if they exist, are still being looked for. Before we close, 3 things. Things that come directly from Danny's story and that matter for you, right now. First, tell someone where you are going. Even on a short trip. Even somewhere familiar. Danni Houchins drove to a fishing spot she had been to many times and no one knew exactly where she was. Today, you have tools that didn't exist in 1996. Turn on location sharing with someone you trust. Send a quick text. Set a check-in time. This is not paranoia. It is the simplest habit that can make the biggest difference. Second, if your family has an unsolved cold case, ask law enforcement about forensic genetic genealogy. Parabon NanoLabs, the company that broke this case, specializes in exactly this. If your local agency is not familiar with it, bring it to them. Push for it. The DNA Doe Project at dnadoeproject.org is another resource for families. Third, support evidence preservation in your community. The 4 heirs that solved this case were 28 years old when they were finally matched. That only happened because Gallatin County stored them properly and never discarded them. Not every agency does that. Contact your local representatives. Support the budgets that make that possible. Danielle Houchins was 15 years old. She drove to her favorite river on a Saturday morning in 1996 wearing blue jeans and a gray sweatshirt, a knee brace from a dance injury still on her leg. And she never came home. Her sister Stephanie spent 28 years making sure the world did not forget that. And 4 heirs, preserved through 3 decades in an evidence bag in Montana, made sure the truth did not disappear with him. Danny's case is solved. But the questions it leaves behind about who Paul Hutchinson really was, about what drove him to that riverbank, about whether there are other families somewhere in Montana still waiting for a name, those questions are still open. And that final phone call. July 24, 2024. Early morning. Paul Hutchinson calls a sheriff's office. He says he needs help. Then hangs up. What was he going to say next? Was it a confession? Was it a plea? Was it something else entirely? That, we will never know. And somehow, that silence is the most chilling part of all. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If Danny's story meant something to you, subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. Like this video so more people can find it. And join our community, the link is in the description box below. Tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? See you in the next one.